She's not a resident's kid. I'm verifying occupancy. That's what Brian Marin, son of Velda Marin, the president of our HOA, shouted as he swung open my car door and slid into the driver's seat. My 2-week-old baby was still strapped in the back. He didn't check. He didn't ask. He just shifted into drive and floored it, the Tesla's quiet hum rising over my scream. The car jerked forward, tires catching the curb, baby formula splattering the asphalt behind me like a dropped lifeline. "Stop! My baby's in there!" The vehicle shot through the roundabout. Brian didn't even look in the rearview mirror. The HOA gates, fitted with their new RFID scanner Velda bragged about last month, opened automatically. And just like that, my daughter vanished behind glass and code. You think you understand fear? You don't. Not until you watch a machine you programmed yourself carry away the only thing you love, and someone else's authority tells you it's procedure. Velda Marin called it community enforcement. I called it the day East Court Haven broke something sacred. By the time I activated the Tesla tracker, Velda was already standing in my driveway with a clipboard. Her red HOA badge gleamed like a shield she thought made her untouchable. "Mr. Rennick," she said smoothly, "your vehicle wasn't on the verified resident registry. Brian followed the rules. This could have been avoided if you'd filled out your compliance paperwork correctly." "My daughter was in that car," I said, shaking. "You call that compliance?" "It was a mistake," she replied, like she was soothing a neighbor over a broken sprinkler. "Let's all calm down before the board hears about this." I stared at her, then let her have it. "You built your registry on an unsecured digital framework. You gave a minor access to resident vehicle tags. And I know that because I helped write the auditing firmware your scanner system runs on." The smile faltered. That was her first flicker of fear. The moment she realized this wasn't just another resident she could bully with policy clauses and laminated pamphlets. So, before we go deeper, before I show you how far these people went to protect their fake authority, hit subscribe right now if you've ever had to fight someone who thought a title made them invincible. Because this isn't just about an HOA gone too far. It's about what happens when control replaces conscience. My name is Calder Rennick. I audit vehicular software for a federal transportation subcontractor. I don't build cars. I secure them. My job is to track digital footprints inside machines. Every access ping, every entry log, every override event, it all gets recorded. And now, those same systems were about to record the worst day of my life. You see, my wife and I weren't supposed to have another child. After we lost our first daughter 3 years ago, the doctors said we'd never carry to term. Again. But Narelle came, tiny, fragile, miracle soft. 2 weeks old, and she already had my habit of humming when she slept. We moved to East Court Haven because the brochures promised peace, privacy, and next-generation security. I wanted her first years to be simple. No alarms, no city noise, no late-night clients tapping my phone for tech emergencies. Just home, just us. But what they never told us was that security meant surrender. Every vehicle tag scanned by the HOA. Every camera feed routed through their community compliance hub. Every resident profiled into their access control grid, all under Velda Marin's watch. And now her son, armed with those same codes, had decided my car wasn't compliant enough to exist inside their gates. My wife was still recovering from a C-section. She could barely make it up the stairs. I had registered that car myself 3 days earlier, but Velda's system hadn't synced yet. Her database lag became my nightmare. I stood there in the street barefoot, watching the camera feed update on my phone in real time. RFID override. Unauthorized user detected. That line burned itself into my vision. It wasn't a glitch. It was proof. And as my daughter's soft cry echoed faintly through the phone speaker, I knew this wasn't about rules anymore. It was about control, disguised as order. The HOA didn't just hijack my car, they hijacked my trust. And that's when I made myself a promise I intend to keep, no matter what it costs them. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was the way Velda stood there with her clipboard, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. As if a mother hadn't been sobbing on the floor behind me, and a newborn hadn't been driven off like someone's lost Amazon package. She didn't ask if the baby was okay. She didn't offer a single word of regret. She adjusted her sunglasses. "Your outburst," she said, "will be noted in the minutes." I was still barefoot, my hands shaking as I monitored the GPS feed from my phone. The Tesla had parked just 3 blocks over inside the HOA's central plaza. A violation impound zone, they called it. It was nothing more than a shaded concrete pad with a few parking bollards and a chain that didn't lock. It wasn't even fenced. The car sat under the sun, completely alone. I grabbed my keys and took off. Velda didn't follow. She didn't need to. She knew what would happen next. That's the game East Court Haven played. Control through policy, immunity through process. A rule for everything. And a form to file if you wanted to question it. I was about to learn just how deep it went. By the time I reached the plaza, the Tesla was locked. Not by me, by Brian. I found him leaning against one of the decorative flower planters, arms crossed, smirking like he'd just won a game. "You're not supposed to run," he said casually. "There's a process. You were supposed to report to the compliance kiosk and file an appeal." I didn't answer. I unlocked the vehicle with my phone, stormed to the back, and yanked open the rear door. Norelle was still asleep. The sound of the air conditioning had lulled her. Her cheeks were flushed from the heat. The strap mark from the 5-point harness was faint, but visible against her neck. I picked her up with one arm and turned to face him. "You put your hands on my daughter's life," I said. Brian tilted his head. "She wasn't listed. No decal. It's not personal." I looked at him then, really looked at him. 17, maybe 18. Tan polo, HOA Youth Volunteer badge laminated and clipped to his belt loop. Velda's little stormtrooper. "She doesn't need a decal," I said, barely keeping the tremor from my voice. "She needs safety, which clearly doesn't exist here." He shrugged. "I was just following policy." The phrase stung more than it should have. I had heard it before, used to justify wrong wires, misfired code, a delay that led to deaths in another city's collision study. When people say just policy, what they mean is, I won't be held responsible. I walked away without another word, cradling my daughter, who stirred once against my chest and then went still again. She had no idea what had happened, and maybe that's what terrified me most, how easily she could have. By the time I returned home, the HOA had already issued a formal notice. Not a violation, a remediation request. They were giving me an opportunity, they said, to resubmit my vehicle profile in accordance with adjusted access protocols. It came in a white envelope, with their gold and blue logo stamped across the top. Inside was a QR code and a cheery note. "We understand that new parenthood can be overwhelming," it read. "East Court Haven is here to help ensure a smooth transition into full community integration." I set the envelope on fire in my driveway. 3 neighbors watched from their windows. One even pulled out a phone, but no one said a word. Later that night, I took apart the Tesla's log system, not the cloud. The onboard data recorder, local storage that couldn't be edited, filtered, or retroactively cleared. And that's when I saw it, a cloned RFID ping. Someone had used a second device to trigger the car's access without the app. Someone with root access to the gate registry. Someone who had pulled the tag ID from a resident vehicle database. And I already knew who had built that database. Velda had made a show of it during the last HOA meeting I attended. "Youth empowerment through digital leadership," she'd said, handing her son the ceremonial ribbon-cutting scissors for the community access terminal in the lobby. Brain had been the one to format the tags for resident vehicles. He had access to everything. She gave him power. And now, he'd used it on a sleeping child. That wasn't policy. That was negligence hiding behind a laminated badge. And I was going to bring it down. Lewin Marin didn't answer when I rang the bell. His house sat at the corner of Aspen Loop and Willow Crescent, one of those brick and stucco hybrids with symmetrical hedges and a mailbox that matched the HOA color palette. The curtains didn't move, but I knew he was inside. His car was in the driveway. And more importantly, his name was on the purchase orders tied to the RFID upgrade, treasurer, signature, and all. I knocked again, harder this time. A soft rustle came from inside, followed by the faint creak of a floorboard. Then the door opened exactly 3 inches. Lewin stood behind it in a faded cardigan, his expression tight, eyes unreadable behind thin-rimmed glasses. His hair was more gray than brown now, and his tie, always knotted, even on weekends, was missing. "I know why you're here," he said quietly. "Good," I replied, "because I'm not leaving without answers." He stepped back, hesitated. then opened the door all the way and gestured me in. His living room smelled like old wood polish and nervous energy. The blinds were half closed, casting uneven lines across a coffee table stacked with budget binders and quarterly reports. A ceramic plate of lemon cookies sat untouched beside a sweating glass of ice water. On the TV, the news was muted, cycling through headlines about corporate data leaks and congressional hearings on tech regulation. Lewin clicked the remote off and sat without looking at me. "You saw the logs," he said. "I did." He exhaled through his nose. "I told her not to give him that level of access." I stayed standing. "You approved the database migration." "I approved the vendor," he snapped, then immediately softened. "Not the data sharing structure. That went through under emergency authority during the July security update. I wasn't at that vote." "But your name's on the funding release." He rubbed his temples. "Because I trusted my wife to use it responsibly." There it was. The first crack in the foundation. Velda Marin might have ruled the boardroom with her color-coded tabs and polished speeches, but here in her own home, the confidence didn't extend. Lewin's posture sagged, his hands twitching like someone accustomed to risk, but never confrontation. "She told me it was for convenience," he said. "Touchless entry, better monitoring, a way to empower youth engagement and reduce gatekeeper costs." "So she used the resident RFID tags," I said flatly, "and gave her son admin-level access." He nodded slowly. "I thought it was just ceremonial. I didn't know he had real permissions. He used those permissions to enter my vehicle, with my daughter inside." Lewin flinched, genuinely. His hand gripped the arm of the chair until his knuckles blanched. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You're the treasurer, Lewin. You're supposed to know." He looked at me then, eyes full of something brittle. Not defiance, remorse, maybe even shame. "Do you have proof?" "I have log data from the Tesla," I said. "Local pings, device fingerprints. I haven't decrypted the access packet yet, but once I do, I'll be able to match the trigger signal to the exact hardware ID." He reached for his glass of water, but didn't drink. "If you're planning to go to the board—" "I'm not," I cut in. "I'm going to the state." Silence. "Unless," I added, "you want to help me fix this before it escalates." His face twitched, and for a moment I thought he'd refuse. But then he leaned forward, elbows on knees, voice low. "She's been pushing further every quarter," he said, "using fear as a lever, porch thefts, parking disputes, dog walkers off leash. The board's too intimidated to vote against her. And those who do, she files for removal under Section 5 misconduct." "And you?" "I tried to stay on to limit the damage," he said, almost defensively. "But I didn't realize she'd weaponized the tech." "You've seen the invoices," I said. "You know what she bought and who installed it." He gave a single, exhausted nod. "Can you get me access to the community access terminal logs?" He hesitated. "I won't make them public," I added. "Not yet, but if this escalates, I need to know exactly how many other residents had their data scraped." He looked toward the hallway, where a family photo hung, Velda, Brian, and Lewin from a few years back. All smiles, all perfectly posed. Then he looked back at me. "If I give you that, you didn't get it from me." "I understand." He stood and crossed to a locked drawer near the kitchen, fished out a key, opened it. When he returned, he handed me a flash drive. "It's encrypted," he said. "She doesn't know I mirrored the logs. You'll need a reader that can parse the metadata structure." I took it, pocketed it, then I nodded once and left without another word. The next morning, a notice was taped to my front door, not mailed, not slipped discreetly into the box, taped, centered, bold, and impossible to miss. Unauthorized tampering with community access systems is a violation of Code 17B. A fine of $750 will be applied. Further unauthorized analysis of HOA equipment may result in legal escalation. Signed at the bottom, in looping blue ink, Velda Marin, President died. I stood there holding the paper, jaw tight, while Narelle whimpered softly in my arms. Her tiny head rested against my collarbone, unaware of the Cold War now brewing just beyond the nursery walls. Velda had moved faster than I expected. Not a surprise. She'd always been better at posturing than leading. But this wasn't just a bluff. The wording was precise, leaning into HOA legalese with surgical intent. She was trying to scare me into silence. Unfortunately for her, I understood the limits of that threat better than she did. I set Norelle down in her bassinet, pulled out the flash drive Lewin had given me, and slid it into my secured laptop. The community access terminal logs opened immediately. Encrypted, yes, but not sophisticated. The metadata blocks were intact. I scrolled through timestamps. Brain's device had pinged the server 28 times in the last month. Not just on my car, but 6 other addresses. The access tags aligned with resident RFID codes. Each violation was followed by a vehicle relocation, warning notice, or, in one case, a temporary access suspension. He'd been testing them, mapping which vehicles would respond, tagging every interaction as training protocol. It wasn't enforcement, it was target practice. I exported the logs, scrubbed identifying data from the resident fields, and created a clone file with just the actions. I wasn't going to blow this wide open yet, not until I was sure I had everything. Velda's mistake wasn't just letting her son play enforcer. It was thinking no one in this community could match her system for system. 3 hours later, I received a follow-up notice via email. This one was different. Your recent behavior has raised concerns about your fitness as a community participant. We recommend a voluntary appearance before the East Court Haven Conduct Review Panel. Declining will be noted in your permanent residency file. Conduct Review Panel? That wasn't in the original HOA charter. I checked. I had the original version downloaded from the resident portal the day we moved in. There was no panel, no clause for behavioral fitness. So, I opened the portal again. The bylaws had changed. The update was timestamped 2 days ago. They'd rewritten the rules while I was still reeling from the incident. Velda hadn't just escalated. She'd rewritten the map to trap me inside it. I filed a request for clarification, citing the discrepancy between the original charter and the updated code. Within 30 minutes, I got a reply from the HOA secretary, someone I'd never met in person. The board reserves the right to update procedural language as needed to ensure community compliance. Revisions do not require resident approval. Except that wasn't true. Section 3.4 of the original charter stated all code additions required a minimum of 51% board vote with a 7-day resident notice window. They'd skipped the vote, skipped the notice, just slipped in new rules under the radar, and now they were daring me to challenge them. So I printed both versions of the bylaws, original and updated, and highlighted the conflicting language. Then I opened a shared folder on a clean cloud instance, created a side-by-side comparison document, and labeled it EHC Violations Timeline. The game had changed. It wasn't just about Brain anymore. It was about every quiet resident who'd been pushed into compliance while the rules bent around them like barbed wire. That evening, I walked Norel around the neighborhood in her stroller, just a casual loop, peaceful, innocuous. And as I passed 3 homes I now knew had been accessed without consent, I watched. 2 residents stepped out and nodded at me. One hesitated, then looked away. A third stood motionless in his yard, holding a rake like he'd forgotten why he was there. They knew. Some of them had been watching this happen for months. The problem wasn't that they didn't care. It was that they didn't think anyone could stop it. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I laid in bed, listening to the shallow breaths of my daughter through the monitor and the distant creak of pine branches shifting outside. Every sound felt sharper now, every shadow heavier. I wasn't afraid, not exactly. I was calculating. At 4:12 a.m., I slipped out of bed, padded into my office, and powered up my isolated diagnostics rig. It wasn't the laptop I used for HOA communications or personal browsing. This one was air-gapped, shielded, and built to read exactly what Velda's team didn't know to hide. I pulled the Tesla's raw event logs from the clone directory I had stored after the incident. Line by line, timestamp by timestamp, I rebuilt the chain. The RFID spoof was only the start. Brian hadn't just pinged the car. He'd issued a partial access command, one that disabled the proximity alert. That feature was designed to trigger when movement was detected near the rear passenger side, while the system recognized an occupant inside. The sensor should have flagged Norel's presence. It didn't, which meant he didn't just spoof the key. He ran a masked command that simulated admin override. That wasn't beginner stuff. That was learned behavior, and it had to come from somewhere. I cross-referenced the command sequence against known toolkits. Some were open source, Others were fragments I'd seen during a federal investigation 2 years ago involving a string of remote hijackings in Utah. There was one pattern I recognized immediately, a timestamp padding string that had been part of a vulnerability report flagged by my own department. Brian had copied it line for line. Someone had taught him how to write it. That narrowed the field. Only a handful of platforms ever published that vulnerability string, and all of them had watermarks, quiet ones, embedded in the execution call. I checked the shell header. There it was. Backseat, a 01 Valkyrie, CET, Community Enforcement Terminal, the HOA's own system. That string wasn't Brian's. It had come from the HOA's back end, from Velda's system, from the very scanner installed in the roundabout control hub. She hadn't just given him access, she'd given him code. I sat back, staring at the screen as the weight of it settled. This wasn't just overreach, it was active participation. The board had implemented a system capable of pushing live commands to resident-owned vehicles, without their consent, without a kill switch. I printed the logs, sealed them in a tamper-proof folder. Then I made 3 secure backups, one on a USB, one on cloud storage tied to a clean email account, and one on an encrypted server overseas that would auto-distribute if not pinged every 72 hours. It wasn't paranoia, it was protocol. By sunrise, I had a case file with enough to trigger a state-level audit, but I needed a trigger event, something that would justify outside jurisdiction without tipping off Velda too early. So I waited. She didn't make me wait long. At 10:32 a.m., I received an official HOA bulletin, not a warning, a community safety alert. It read, "Due to a potential cybersecurity breach involving vehicle data, all residents are advised to submit their vehicle access logs to the HOA Security Subcommittee for review. Failure to comply may result in temporary access suspension." There it was, the overstep, the overconfidence. Velda didn't realize I'd already documented the breach. She thought she could pin it on a resident, or better yet, use it to clean her tracks. But demanding access to private logs, that violated 3 clauses in the HOA charter and 2 in the state's Privacy Protection Act. And now I had a hard documented act of coercion. I called a friend, not a lawyer, a compliance officer with the Oregon Department of Public Safety. We'd worked together before on a recall case tied to falsified collision data in Portland. I told her what I had. She didn't hesitate. "Send it. If it checks out, we'll open a file within the week." I sent it. Everything. Logs, command traces, headers, policy discrepancies. And I waited. By evening, I received confirmation. Preliminary review complete. Grounds for administrative inquiry established. Proceed discreetly. That was it. The first real crack in Velda's wall. I didn't tell my wife. Not yet. She'd been through enough already, and the bruising from her surgery hadn't even faded. I watched her hold Norel that morning, rocking gently in the nursery chair, humming a song she hadn't sung in years, something from her own childhood. I stood in the doorway, thinking how fragile peace really was, how easily it cracked when you let people like Velda into your walls. But I didn't have the luxury of silence anymore. The phone buzzed just before noon, a restricted number. I picked up. "This is Rennick." A pause. "Department of Public Safety," the woman said. "My name is Inspector Janelle Lowen. You submitted digital forensic logs regarding potential unauthorized access within a private HOA system?" "Yes. We're escalating the case. Your documents aligned with an open vector that our agency flagged in a separate municipal review. We're dispatching a compliance liaison to your area." My grip tightened. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing yet. Don't confront them. Don't distribute the data further. We're coordinating jurisdiction with the Attorney General's office. Keep the original logs secure. Do not alter them." "Understood." Before she hung up, she added, "And, Mr. Rennick, your baby wasn't the first, but she might be the last." I sat with that sentence for longer than I should have. The idea that someone else, another child, another parent, had already been through this without anyone speaking up. It lit something inside me I hadn't felt in years, not since I worked field reviews for vehicle incident reconstruction. I'd seen wreckage, mangled steel, parents with blank stares and broken hands from trying to pry doors open. And now I was standing on the other side of it, before the damage, with the chance to stop it. That night, Narelle screamed in her sleep. She didn't wake, not all the way, but the cry was sharp, panicked, confused. I sat beside her crib, rubbing her back, watching her tiny fingers curl and uncurl. She'd been calm before the car, but afterward, she startled at sounds now. Her feeding rhythm had shifted. Something had been imprinted. The car was back in our driveway. Same polished frame, same software, but I couldn't look at it without remembering how it rolled away from me. I'd reset the onboard data and locked out third-party access, but it didn't matter. The damage had been done. By morning, I made a decision. I wasn't waiting for Velda to make another move. I was going to end this, cleanly, surgically, with the one thing she couldn't outmaneuver, her own infrastructure. I walked to the roundabout gate. It was early, just after 7, and the street was quiet. No joggers, no cyclists. The sun had barely cleared the roof lines, casting long shadows across the scanner column. The black casing looked harmless enough, unmarked, no branding. But I knew the model, I knew the firmware, and I knew exactly where its weak spots lived. I removed my phone and opened a diagnostic shell. One line of code, a ping to the scanner, response, authenticated. I keyed in a passive query, non-invasive. It wouldn't trigger alerts, just a readback of access history from the last 30 days. Results, 47 entries, 7 unique devices, 2 of them registered as youth admin. One of those had triggered access on my vehicle, and the other? It had scanned the entry column for every single address on the northern half of East Court Haven. A data scrape. System-wide. Bran had done more than play enforcer. He'd been cataloging residents, behaviors, access times. For what purpose? Training, punishment, or something else entirely? I sent the data to Inspector Lowen through the encrypted line she'd provided. A few minutes later, she responded. This confirms scope. The audit is greenlit. You'll be hearing from legal within 72 hours. I stood there for a long time, watching the sun edge up over the scanner casing. No one knew it yet, but the entire system was already collapsing. The house of authority Velda had built, line by line, vote by vote, was about to buckle under the weight of her own. Arrogance. And I wasn't going to stop it. Not anymore. Lewin showed up at my door the next evening. No warning, no email, no clipboard. Just a man with a sagging posture and a plastic grocery bag in his left hand. I brought receipts, he said. I stepped aside without a word and let him in. He moved cautiously, like someone who expected a camera in every corner, a mic hidden in the ceiling fan. His eyes scanned the room before he sat at the edge of my dining table, bag still clutched in his hand like a guilty offering. She's changing the ledger, he said finally, manually, after meetings. I didn't answer. I just waited. He pulled out a thick file of printed PDFs, screen captures of ledger entries, budget allocations, vendor names, timestamps. All of them marked with digital notary stamps he must have used without Velda noticing. These are from the quarterly expense reports. I compared the versions on the public portal to what I kept internally. He tapped the stack. Line items were moved. Others were deleted completely. Payments reclassified as youth development or tech modernization. She's been covering the cost of the scanner expansion through discretionary fund categories the board never approved. How long? Lewin's mouth twitched. At least 10 months. He pulled out one more document, a purchase request dated 6 months prior. The header read, Expansion Initiative, Phase 2. The line item, RFID tag development, high school integration pilot. I stared at the wording. She was planning to deploy this to local students? He nodded, grim. That scanner your car responded to? It was part of a beta test for remote synced enforcement access. She didn't want to wait for resident feedback. She wanted data before the next HOA election cycle. And Brian? He was the test case. Of course he was. He was the golden child, the model of community youth obedience. He'd been given tools, access, authority, and no guidance. Just Velda's blind belief in a system she thought would prove her right. I flipped through the files again, scanning dates, noting overlaps between meetings and expenditures. Then I saw it, an invoice from a small Portland-based software vendor, one I recognized. They sold custom integrations for RFID-based entry logs and telemetry bundling, the same vendor my department had flagged last year for failing to disclose security flaws in their open-source firmware. She hadn't just used shady code. She'd paid a company known for breaching data regulations and signed the purchase herself. I looked up at Lewin. He was sweating now, hands curled around a chipped mug I hadn't realized he'd grabbed. "Why now?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "My son doesn't talk to me anymore," he said after a long pause. "Everything is Velda and the HOA. I sit at the table with them and I'm the outsider. I thought if I just stayed on the board, I could rein her in quietly. But I kept rationalizing every overreach until we got here." He looked at me then. "When Brian took your daughter, I realized how far I'd let this go. I didn't soften. He didn't deserve that yet. But I opened my laptop and added his documents to the compliance file. Redundant backups uploaded to the encrypted cloud. The case was growing teeth. "I'm sending these tonight," I said. Lewin gave a slow nod. "She won't see it coming," he muttered. "She already knows something's wrong," I said. "The fake conduct review panel, the threats, the tampering. She's tightening her grip because she knows it's slipping." Lewin didn't answer. He just stared down at his hands. They trembled slightly as he set the mug aside. "I have one more thing," he said, pulling a small envelope from his coat pocket. Inside was a folded slip of paper. When I opened it, I saw a handwritten username, an access key. Below it, remote admin login, cat server, East Court terminal. I looked up. "She never logged me out," he said quietly. "She doesn't know I still have back-end access." "You understand what this gives me?" "I do." "And you're okay with that?" "No," he said. "But I'm more okay with that than watching someone else's kid get hurt." I copied the key, uploaded it to my diagnostics rig, and locked it behind a biometric vault. This was it, the last piece. Velda didn't know it yet, but her firewall had just let me in. I didn't use the access key right away. Not because I wasn't ready, because I needed to be sure. When you step into someone's system from the inside, even with credentials, you leave a fingerprint. One misstep and the person watching the logs knows you've been there. So I watched first. 3 days. That's how long I let the system breathe while I studied its heartbeat. Velda's Community Access Terminal, CAT, as her little acronym read, operated on a predictable cycle. Every morning at 7 a.m., the scanner nodes synced with the main server. Every evening at 6 p.m., they performed a backup to a cloud drive labeled EHC Admin Vault. But there was a gap. Midnight to 3 a.m., a window where server traffic dipped to near zero. Velda didn't schedule maintenance during that time, probably didn't expect anyone to be watching then. That's when I went in. I used the credentials Lewin gave me, paired them with a tunneling protocol from my audit toolkit, and spoofed a static endpoint masked as a printer connection from the clubhouse. The CAT system didn't blink. The interface was bare bones, HTML skin over a modified Linux shell, sloppy, fast-built. The kind of control system meant to impress board members with flashy acronyms, but built on fragile scaffolding. Velda had been smart enough to hide audit logs, but she hadn't wiped system shadows. Every change, every admin override, every vehicle scan still lingered in time-stamped echo. Files. I pulled them all. 713 unique pings, 46 vehicles, 9 flagged for pattern violations, 1 marked with a red tag, admin override, child on board unverified. That was me. That was Narelle. She hadn't even removed the note. The system had a tagging option, used internally, likely as a filter. Under mine, Velda had added a note I wasn't prepared for. Parental non-compliance, behavioral risk. I stared at the screen for a long time. This wasn't about my car anymore. This was about control, behavioral scoring, digital profiling based on internal data that was never supposed to leave personal hands. And she wasn't hiding it. Not from herself, not from the system, only from the rest of the board. I cross-referenced the flagged residents. 5 had received warnings in the last 3 months. 2 had conduct review panel notices issued. 1 had his gate access suspended for 72 hours due to non-cooperation with digital documentation procedures. She was using the RFID system as a behavior monitor. If you didn't obey, you didn't belong. I scraped the entire data set and packaged it with the purchase logs Lewin had given me. Then I used the internal admin key to extract the directory structure from the cloud vault, the one she thought was private. It was all there. Invoices, vendor emails, meeting recordings. She'd saved everything. Maybe it was arrogance. Maybe it was her way of controlling the board, holding proof of how far they'd already gone with her. Either way, it was a tactical mistake. Because now, it was mine. I didn't broadcast anything, not yet. I built a timeline instead. From the first scanner purchase to the unauthorized gate installations. From the first RFID tag issued to the last override command, logged under Brian's ID. I layered every document, timestamp, and policy change into a cascading visual map. Cause, effect, pattern, consequence. I sent a secure link to Inspector Lowen with a subject line that read, "Full structure, end-to-end control system, East Court." She responded within the hour. "Received. This exceeds administrative violation. Coordination with State AG underway. Target date for field deployment, pending clearance. Do not engage further without instruction." But I wasn't done yet. Because buried in the directory logs, there was a folder labeled Phase 3. Inside, a draft policy proposal titled Tiered Resident Clearance. She was planning to segment residents by digital trust scores. Not just vehicle tags, but pedestrian gate access, amenity reservations, and HOA voting eligibility. Voting. Velda wasn't just controlling access, she was building a digital caste system, one she could tune from her laptop, one that started with a teenager dragging my newborn away like she was a suitcase. I closed the folder, then I opened a new window and began drafting my final step, a community-wide packet. One file, one link, every log, every proof, every voice she tried to silence. When it dropped, it would hit every inbox in East Court Haven. But not yet. Not until I was face to face with her. The moment I saw her SUV pull into the HOA lot that Friday morning, I knew it was time. Velda stepped out in her usual uniform, powder blue blazer, matching folder under her arm, sunglasses perched just high enough to avoid eye contact. Her heels clicked across the pavement as if the sidewalk belonged to her. And in her mind, it probably did. I waited across the street, half shielded by the maintenance shed near the clubhouse. Not hiding, just observing, timing. She entered the building at 8:07 a.m., right on schedule. The weekly operations sync meeting would keep her busy for at least 30 minutes. That gave me just enough time. I crossed to the clubhouse side entrance, keycard already in hand. Lewin had mailed it in a plain white envelope the night before, along with a scribbled note that simply said, "It still works." She never deactivated mine. The scanner blinked green. Inside, the air smelled of fake lavender and printer heat. The admin wing was quiet, save for the buzz of the lobby vending machine. I moved fast, sliding past the reception desk and into the server alcove beside the meeting room. No one used it during sync hour. It was considered too technical for the average board member. The terminal booted up with a faint click. I inserted my encrypted USB and watched the scripts run. Within seconds, the sync logs began transferring. Not just the raw access data, but the version history of the CAT policy framework, the edits, the redactions, the internal memos Velda never meant for anyone to see. It was all time-stamped, all traceable. I printed 2 key documents on the HOA's own letterhead, the draft for the tiered resident clearance, and a concealed internal memo suggesting HOA voting access could eventually be privilege based on compliance and behavioral alignment. She hadn't just thought it, she'd typed it. I pocketed the originals and made 2 high-quality duplicates. Then I walked down the hallway, past the frosted glass of the main conference room, and slid 1 copy into each of the board member mail slots just outside the door. No one saw me. No one said a word. By the time Velda walked out of the meeting 20 minutes later, they'd all be sitting in their inboxes, waiting. I walked straight home, didn't look back. That evening, just before sunset, I made one final move. I pulled up the community-wide email system through the HOA portal, accessed via the CAT server admin panel Lewin had unlocked for me. It took 4 steps to bypass the mass mailing restriction, but once the override was in place, the resident dispatch system opened like a floodgate. I didn't use my name. I didn't need to. The subject line read, "Your access, their control." The body included a download link to the public-facing version of the timeline report. Every resident would see what the board had signed, what Velda had buried, and how close they'd all come to losing their own voting rights in the name of digital compliance. Within minutes, the messages began landing. Phones lit up. Email pings echoed across porches and patios. The HOA's website slowed from traffic. Someone in the clubhouse must have triggered the internal alert, because 15 minutes later, the admin portal went offline entirely. But the files had already spread. The logs were on Reddit, then Nextdoor, then a parent group chat in the community's school district forum. And by the time the sun disappeared behind the pines, a dozen porch lights on Aspen Loop were still on, residents standing in robes and sandals, talking in low voices. I watched from my window as one of them pointed toward the scanner at the end of the street. Another shook their head. Someone else clutched a printed copy of the policy memo with both hands. Not shouting, not angry, but awakened. And that was enough. Because Velda had built her authority on silence, on the assumption that no one would look too closely, or dig too deep, or understand what they were seeing. But now they saw it, in their inboxes, on their sidewalks, in their own driveways, and they weren't going to unsee it. Velda didn't call a special session. She didn't send an apology. She didn't issue a statement. She called an emergency lockdown of the HOA portal. By sunrise, the community forums had been scrubbed, comments disabled, contact forms deactivated, the HOA's homepage redirected to a single static message. Due to an influx of misinformation and system spam, East Court Haven's digital infrastructure is undergoing emergency maintenance. Normal functions will resume shortly. It was the digital equivalent of boarding up the windows, but the damage was already done. By mid-morning, the clubhouse parking lot overflowed with residents, most still in weekend clothes, some carrying folders, phones, and printouts of the policy draft I'd uploaded. The air buzzed with that low-frequency chaos you only hear before something irreversible happens. At 9:01 a.m., the double doors opened and Velda stepped out. She looked exactly as she always did, controlled, tailored, the kind of expression that told you she wasn't there to listen. She was there to contain. "Thank you for coming on short notice," she said, loud enough to carry across the courtyard. "We're aware of the confusion surrounding recent unauthorized communications. I want to personally assure you that the board is reviewing the matter internally," and a man near the front stepped forward, holding up a printed log sheet. "Did you write this?" he asked. "The part about behavioral tracking and tiered access?" Velda's mouth didn't twitch. "That document is a misrepresentation of an early draft meant for board review only. So it's real," someone else cut in. She hesitated. "It was never implemented. But you wrote it." Velda took a breath. "The purpose was to explore community engagement strategies. In light of recent increases in behavioral complaints, it's our duty to ensure harmony and compliance across." "Is that why you let your son access our car tags?" The question came from the left, a woman clutching a stroller. Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. I recognized her, lived 2 houses down from the playground, had twin boys who liked to ride scooters down the main sidewalk. Velda's eyes narrowed. "My son was acting in good faith, under board-approved supervision. He moved my car without asking," another voice called, "and left a fake citation on the windshield." A man near the back shouted, "We have a gate access scanner recording him tailing my wife into the fitness lot. She was walking with our daughter." "I didn't authorize any of that," Velda snapped. "But you built the system," I said. She turned toward me slowly. Her eyes scanned the crowd as if daring them to move. "Mr. Rennick," she said, "given your involvement in this situation, perhaps you'd like to explain to the board how you gained access to confidential systems?" I stepped forward, holding the sealed copy of the forensic timeline in one hand. "Same way your son did, using a login you never deactivated, one still listed under your treasurer's account." Gasps rippled through the front rows. Someone muttered Lewin's name. "He gave you access?" Velda asked, voice low, teeth tight. "No," I replied. "You did. The moment you stopped logging out your own audit terminals, the moment you decided community infrastructure was a private playground." She didn't respond. I held up the second copy of the file. "This packet contains every access event tied to Brian Marin's ID, along with the override commands sent from CAT firmware. Commands pulled from your administrative node between April and August. Every one of those events is time-stamped, verifiable, and backed up on a Department of Public Safety server." Velda stepped back. Just once. Barely emotion, but enough. Lewin emerged from the crowd, not dramatic, just steady. He walked past her, past the board members frozen on the clubhouse steps, and faced the residents. "I've submitted my resignation," he said quietly. "Effective immediately. I've also turned over all financial records to the state auditor. The rest is in your hands." He handed a small binder to the man in front. Velda's lips parted. "You don't," Lewin said. "Not today." She didn't. She turned and walked back through the doors, heels echoing like brittle glass. Behind her, the board didn't follow. They tried to keep the meeting private. The agenda email called it a closed administrative session for board review of digital infrastructure concerns. But the residents showed up anyway, more than 50 of them, crowded into folding chairs and lining the back walls of the clubhouse hall. Nobody asked permission. They just came. Velda sat at the head of the table, gavel in hand, flanked by 3 remaining board members. One seat was conspicuously empty, Lewin's. A faint outline of his nameplate still clung to the lacquer. The air was sharp with tension, not loud, not angry, just waiting. "I will open the floor for structured commentary," Velda began, her voice calm but brittle. "However, disruptions will not be tolerated. We're here to address the cyber incident." "It wasn't an incident," someone said from the back. "It was a breach, and you're the one who built it." Velda's lips thinned. "We will maintain order. You lost control of a system you never had the right to build." The voice belonged to the same man who'd spoken at the plaza, tall, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp. He held up a printed screenshot from the CAT terminal interface. "This shows Brian had level 1 admin clearance. That's deeper access than most HOA employees get." Velda didn't deny it. She didn't speak at all. Beside her, a younger board member, Elise Harker, community events chair, fumbled with her notes. She leaned toward Velda, whispered something. Velda didn't respond. Elise looked up instead. "Is it true the resident voting restrictions were already being drafted?" Velda finally moved. "It was exploratory, nothing more." Another voice rose from the front. "Then why was it marked for Phase 3 implementation?" I stepped forward then, not to yell, not to confront, just to finish what I started. I placed the printed forensic timeline on the table, slid it across the polished surface until it bumped Velda's folder. She didn't reach for it. "The documents were reviewed by state authorities. The logs were verified. This isn't interpretation, it's evidence." A murmur swept the room. I turned to face the residents behind me. She didn't just install scanners, she used them to monitor access, trigger behavioral flags, and assign informal punishments. Some of you lost amenity access. Some were shadow flagged for non-cooperation. Velda straightened in her seat. "These measures were intended to foster safety and order. We've had record decreases in incidents since you had a minor move a vehicle with an infant inside," I said flatly. "That's not safety. That's negligence with a badge." Silence pressed down hard. Then Elise stood up. "I vote to suspend President Marin's executive authority pending further review." Gasps cut through the room. Velda turned to her, stunned. "You don't have the jurisdiction. The charter gives us interim authority in the case of confirmed internal breaches," Elise said. Her voice was shaking but steady. "It was passed 2 years ago, in the digital modernization motion. You cited it yourself when you forced out board member Riggins." Another board member raised his hand. "I second the motion." Velda's gavel stayed frozen in her hand. She looked at Elise, then at the crowd, then at me. "This is a lynch mob," she said quietly. "You're all being manipulated by data you don't understand." "I understand enough," said a mother near the front, holding her daughter's hand. "I saw what they tagged me for. Emotional volatility. Because I cried at a meeting." Velda's hands tightened on the gavel. Another voice called out, "You scored my kid as a potential disruption because he forgot his ID badge." "You treated us like suspects," someone else said. "Not neighbors." The third board member finally spoke. "Call the vote." Velda didn't move. Elise stood, stepped forward, and gently took the gavel from her fingers. "All in favor?" Hands rose, one after another. Velda didn't raise hers. She didn't look up. She stood slowly, gathered her folder, and walked out without a word. The door shut behind her, and for the first time in months, no scanner blinked at the exit. Velda never returned to another meeting. No resignation letter, no final statement. Just silence, and then disappearance. The board held a formal vote 2 weeks later to remove her permanently. Elise Harker was named interim president by unanimous decision. No one objected. The scanner towers were removed 3 days after the vote. Crews came early, before the sun was up. By noon, the roundabout gate was just concrete and dust again. No beeping, no blinking, no forced compliance. It was strange how fast it all disappeared. All that fear, all that control, gone like it had never been installed. But the damage hadn't vanished with the hardware. At the next community gathering, I stood with Narelle in my arms under a tent beside the empty podium. Dozens of neighbors mingled, cautious at first, but free in a way they hadn't been in months. Parents swapped stories. Teenagers skated past without being glared at. Nobody scanned anyone. Lewin stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, watching the dismantled scanner base get loaded into the back of a utility truck. He hadn't said much since the vote. I couldn't blame him. I walked over and stood beside him. "She built a system that could have lasted 10 years, I said. He nodded. She thought she was making it better. She forgot we were people. Lewin didn't answer, but his shoulders dropped slightly. He looked tired. "I've been asked to join the audit committee," I added after a pause. "They want to build new transparency tools, open source, resident accessible. You'll do it?" "I will, but only on one condition." He glanced at me. "That the data belongs to the people it tracks, not the board." He gave a small nod. "That's fair." Behind us, Elise approached the podium. She tapped the mic twice, smiled nervously, and began to speak. "We're here today not just to celebrate the removal of failed systems, but to acknowledge the ones who stood up when the rest of us were scared. The people who asked the hard questions, and the ones who paid the price for our silence." She looked directly at me. "We'll never let silence be our policy again." Applause broke out. Not thunderous, not theatrical, but real. Neighbors clapping for themselves, for each other. Later that day, a crew began work on the old scanner foundation. They leveled the concrete and installed a small garden bed where the base had stood. In the center, they placed a simple plaque. "This ground once held power, now it holds roots." I read it twice, holding Norelle close. She squirmed in my arms, wide awake now, her small eyes taking in the shapes and sounds. The breeze tugged at her little hat. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't check the gate. I didn't scan the road. I just let myself breathe. The system fell because someone pushed it too far. But it stayed down because a community finally stood up. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.